Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
I first want to begin, and I'm going to be lecturing now very quickly, to set a framework for what's going to come, okay? So, modernity, enlightenment, and we have to think about it, 18th, 19th century. You have the intellectual enlightenment taking place in Europe, and that's what we're focused on. And simultaneously, you have the unfolding of the Industrial Revolution. What do those two things have in common? Radical change to society, right? Radical change, increased secularism, diminished religiosity, new areas of economic development, moving from, just as an example, Germany was mostly agrarian into the middle of the 19th century. Okay, that's pretty far. Think about it. Mostly agrarian. So you're having the shifting over, and the especially middle to lower middle class is having a great deal of difficulty absorbing all of this. Right? These are not the most schooled people, right? Intellectual. They are dealing with small owners, small landowners, small shop owners, people who work in, mailmen, people, things like that. And the shift over is causing a great deal of economic as well as cultural change. So think culturally. What you have is the rise of modern philosophy, more secular ideology. You have changes in art, in music, in literature, industrial design, right? You can think about all of these different things that are all happening, approximately at the same time. When you have radical change like that, for people who have difficulty changing, it is a big challenge, and they feel insecure, and especially where you have recessions or depressions, and think about the Great Depression as part of this process. When all that is going on, plus you had a World War I, all right? Think about all this stuff, all these upheavals that are going on. And you have the Russian Revolution on top of it. It's a big turmoil. And people seek simple answers for complex problems. Keep that all in mind, okay? All right. So in the late 19th, late 18th, in other words, 1750 to 1800, give or take, all right? Just a couple of examples of really radical change. You got Moses Mendelssohn in the Jewish world. Moses Mendelssohn, great philosopher. He combined modern European philosophy with Maimonides, Philo. The guy is really very smart. And of course, he does his German, writes in German, translates the Bible into German, right? He's a Bible scholar and he's a Jewish theologian, okay? And so this man, and he's known in the community in Germany. He has disputations with Christians, very friendly ones, but he is known. And by the way, interestingly, 2 generations later, his family is totally assimilated, and the Mendelssohn Bank that was opened up continued to operate until the Nazis nationalized it, later on in the 1930s, okay? But Moses Mendelssohn's impact on Judaism was very profound. He was rather traditional, okay? And in a certain sense, Reform and Conservative Judaism are two paths in the 19th century that spin off from a lot of what his thinking, all right? Okay, that's just a quick summary. That's one example. At the same time, in France, you have the lead up to and the inclusion of the French Revolution, 1709 to 1799, right? After the American Revolution. Forget about the United States. Anyway, and what that did to Europe, the whole challenge to monarchy, right? The establishment's democratic institutions and so forth. And that had its ups and downs throughout the 19th. But it's revolutionary. One of the people who was sort of the grandfather to that, and this is with relationship to Judaism, that was Voltaire. Voltaire was an ideologue and a man of letters, living in the second half of the 18th century. And, he wrote, prolifically. And he used Judaism and critique, especially of the Hebrew Bible. And so that whole issue of this, he pulled out a lot of negative stuff from the Hebrew Bible, right? And interestingly, this is the exact same thing that Roman thinkers in the early centuries of the Common Era were doing against Christianity, using the Hebrew Bible as a tool to criticize the church. Okay, that's pagans, second, third, and fourth century. All right. Then you have now Voltaire basically doing the same thing. Well, that doesn't speak very nicely in terms of the people he's talking about, i.e., the Jews. But in addition to that, he seems to have been exposed. Remember, Enlightenment, the recovery of all kinds of Greek and Roman classics, among that Josephus, and among his writings against Appian, which is, of course, his response to the ancient anti-Semitism looked at, decades ago, things like that ago. Anyways, months ago, right? All right, anyhow, so there too, he seems to have picked up on some of these ancient ideas that the Jews hated non-Jews, okay? And that would be we were astray, weird people. Yeah, bad news for the Jews, and this is happening on the liberal side of Europe, not the other side, okay? And so these ideas are all floating around, okay? All right, 19th century. Now this, what I'm about to say is a lot of this is coming from Christian activity, with the advance of archaeology, okay, and a kind of religious pushback where people are trying to find the truth of religion, especially Christians who are feeling this secularization. So suddenly digging for the truth in Eretz Israel became a major focus. And you have more and more Christian archaeologists doing that. And a lot of the groundwork for subsequent, more scientific, realistic interpretation of archaeology was laid by all of these Christian archaeologists. So that starts to focus on the ancient Israelites. And plus, at the same time, in the 1850s, you get Wellhausen with his documentary hypothesis, where he tears the 5 books of Moses down to 4 different traditions and opens the door to modern Bible criticism. Now, this is a Christian, right? A Protestant. So on the one hand, you can see he's out to get the fundamentalists, but at the same time, he has a message, which is that ultimately true essence of Judaism lies in the prophets, not in the law.
Rabbi, who is it? Whose philosophy was this?
What?
Whose philosophy was this?
Well, they're not philosophy. It's a science. It's how you read the Bible. Wellhausen is his name, with a W at the beginning. Okay, and this is the man who opened the door to Bible criticism as a serious way of studying the Bible. But he has an axe to grind by trying to argue that the laws of the Bible represent the narrow-minded Jew, whereas the prophets, with their social and ethical and monotheistic theology, that's where Jesus comes into play. So even though he's opening the door to something very contemporary, he basically is playing out the same role that Paul sort of did when he was writing his letters. The laws for the Jews. And of course he says, I'm a Jew. All right, that's something else, but the laws for the Jews, you guys, the rest of the world, read the prophets and read Jesus. That's the truth, okay? So you've got that underlying anti-Jewish sentiment. I mean, I don't know that he was real anti-Semite, but you can see how flowing out of this is some nasty stuff. All right, so this is all going on at the same time. Okay, but this interest in ancient Near East, the ANE, when you see ANE, that's an ancient Near East, okay? Just as you should know if you ever see. Anyhow, so the ancient Near East became something that opened the door to studying language. People became interested in Semitic languages because those were the languages of the Bible, Hebrew and, of course, Aramaic. And so the studies of these things began to develop, okay? And it was a lot of groundwork for subsequent studies of the linguistics emerged from that. A lot of recalculation, of course, over time, because this is all primitive stuff back then. But nonetheless, good foundation. But there's another thing that's happening. Sociology is developing. Anthropology is developing. And suddenly people are looking, and then there's this guy, Darwin, who comes up with this notion of evolution. Now, if you ask Darwin, you're talking about evolution. What are you talking about? My theory of evolution, and he wrote this way, focuses on animal life in instances where you have hard evidence that you can point to prove that there is this kind of evolutionary change. It's science, okay? What happened, though, was these other, soft science, that's hard science. He would say, I don't know if he used the term, but that's hard science, okay? It's biology. It's based in the same material evidence that you have in chemistry, all right? Well, the social sciences, which are soft science, because there's a lot of interpretation there and extrapolation of things from information that is not necessarily grounded in what you could call hard facts. So they call it all soft science. I'm a historian. It's soft science because, it's a lot of it is projections, logical projections. Science doesn't always follow human logic. We know that. All right. So as a result, they began looking at the Greco-Latin languages, right? And comparing that with Semitic language. And suddenly they're seeing, boy, the Greek and Latin is a much more scientific language, much more sophisticated language than this ancient Near Eastern Hebrew. And it's clear. And look what they produce. The Greeks produced, and the Romans, all these great thinkers, scientists, doctors, right? Philosophers, political theorists. And what do these ancient Jews, what did they produce? Well, prophets, whoopee-doo. An ancient law system that is now totally defunct, right? They produced a Talmud that nobody can understand, okay? So what kind of garbage is that? So suddenly what emerges from that? Then which is the superior civilization? The European civilization or the Middle Eastern civilization? Clearly, the European civilization is a higher civilization. And look right now, look at all the things that are going on here. What's going on over there? All those tribes, they're still running around killing each other. What do they know? So suddenly you begin to have what you would call the sense of superiority and inferiority. So who's the superior one? The European. Who's the inferior one? The Semite. And that includes the Arabs. I mean, look, where were their automobiles? Where'd they come from? Think, late 19th, early 20th century. Where were tanks, right? Airplanes. Who were producing all these things? Them? No. Okay. Science. Great scientists. All right. So clearly what's emerging is a kind of a general feeling among intellectuals now. Among intellectuals. Okay. So you see where this is heading, right? You now have a sense of one culture, one group of people. And the fact is, what was interesting is also there was an increasing interest in Far Eastern stuff again. China, India, right? And those civilizations, okay? And even Egyptian stuff. I mean, all these real old stuff where you have a lot of hard facts in the ground you can look at. So you have these, now suddenly you don't have just European, you have Indo-European culture, okay? And so you have Indo-European language because people began to find literary connections or linguistic connections between Hindi and Greek and Latin. And it's true. I mean, to this day, there was an influx of. Anyhow, so the bottom line is, by the time you hit the 20th century, all of this stuff is percolating, right? So then you have, right. So at the same time, though, in Europe, what's going on with European Jewry? First of all, Western Europe. Right now, don't look at Eastern Europe, okay? Western Europe, well, that's where all the action, all right? So are there Jews in Western Europe? Yes. Are they large numbers? No. Very small number. The influx of Eastern European Jews into Western Europe doesn't really begin until the middle of the 19th centuries, with all the revolutions that were taking place in Europe. A lot of, that's not my, erase that for a moment. That brought European, Western European Jews in the United States. But as life got difficult in the latter part of the 19th century for European Jews, starting in the 18th, as you have increased pogrom activity, where do these Jews begin to move? Into Western Europe, right? So suddenly, and let's focus on Germany, begin to have an influx of Germany by these weirdos in black hats and black coats, even though not all of them wore that, all right, and beards and all that stuff. suddenly these people are coming in Germany. And they're very different kinds of people. They don't live the same way we Germans, especially because they're moving into the cities, okay, where a lot of very cultured and very proper Germans. So those are not people who are generating a lot of positive images of the Jews. But simultaneously, there are other Jews who are beginning to pop up, though their numbers initially were small, and they remain small relative to Eastern Europeans, who are now dealing with science and dealing with art and dealing with literature and so forth and so on. But what's strange about it that these are people who are willing to push the limits. Okay, so you're now getting more of a the stock market, the bourse becomes a more powerful economic force. So who pop up in out of proportion to their population suddenly in managing that kind of Jews, Jewish bankers. Now this is going to hark back to what? What was what was going on with the popes, the Jews, and others in the High Middle Ages? Moneylenders, right? And all that tradition gets passed down, okay? And then suddenly it's reawakened, all right? So that's you see where that's heading. All right, then you have Jews like Max Liebermann. You ever hear of Max Liebermann? Max Liebermann was one of the leaders of one of the Berlin schools of modern art, of Impressionism, okay? And he was highly regarded and had many disciples, and ultimately he died in the 30s. I don't know if the Nazis killed him, but he died just as the Nazis were clamping down on Jews in the 1930s, okay? But this is a man, they said, you see, those Jews, what was Hitler saying? This is the corruption of European culture by those Jews. Modern music, we would call it modern classical music, serious music, all kinds of new sounds, art, music, all other things, literature. So these Jews are beginning to undermine, they're part of this process of change, but it's become radicalized by these Jews. And so ultimately we are seeing cancer, they're now seeing a kind of a cancer working within the European society, operating on different levels simultaneously. You've got these highly cultured people who really are undermining the deep cultural roots of European culture, while at the same time you have these Jews, these Eastern European Jews who are from Mars, not just because of the way they dress. What do they speak? They speak this bastardization of German. What are they speaking? Yiddish. What's Yiddish? German. Bastardized in the eyes of those people. And by the way, the German Jews thought the same thing that the Ashkenazim were. They were so embarrassed by it. Okay, but you can see. So you have it operating at the high cultural level, and then the masses of these who are beginning to tarnish even the lower levels of culture. But then something else new pops, and it is the shifting of this. What shall we say again? Upper European on top, Semite below, into racial definition, blood, shape of the body, features, etc., etc. And sometimes, somehow, gradually, that concept of actual physicality of the corruption of Europe develops. All right. So the attack is coming from many directions. It ends up their Stürmer, pro-Nazi publication that emerged in the 30s. Frequently, they run their motto across. We saw that Juden sind unsere Umwelt. Jews are our mis. And that's where that's all by way of background. I did it in half an hour. Not that. Sorry, it's all superficial, but you get a sense of what's been going on. All right. All right. Any questions at this point? Okay. With that in mind, I invite you to take your material on the protocols of the meetings, the Zionist Men of Wisdom, by Sergei Nilus. All right. So the protocols, I'm not going to go into a lot on the background of protocols. There's a very fine article in Wikipedia, honestly. Read it, looking at it from all kinds of different angles. And it's, as like anything else, it's more complicated than you probably, but it's worth a glance. But basically, this has emerged from Russian, and it is not sure exactly who initiated how so, but it appears in the early 1900s. This guy, Sergei Nilus, is the first person who really published them all together as part of a book. but it had come out earlier in 1903. Peace Journal, all of this in Russian. Eventually, it gets translated. The first English translation of in 20 by people who they were Russians who spoke and wrote English, and they believe it's true. I mean, they're not only translating it, they're advocating. And so, if I'm not mistaken, the translation that on which what you have was based ultimately goes back to anyhow. And so ultimately, what it was an attempt by pro-Tsarist elements to lay the blame for the apparent decline of Russian power after the loss of the war in 1905, and then there were revolts in 1905. Russia itself, the power of the Tsar was apparently weakened, and so these pro-Tsarist Russian nationalists trying to find some way to blame it, and the blame off the shoulders of the Tsarist, which of course we know had become corrupt. And, poverty in Russia during those early years of the 20th century in the country, so when the big revolution occurred in 19, we saw a lot of people. Anyway, so these people tried to shift the blame off of the Tsar and his family. And so when this was written, the Jews were a mastermind, and simultaneously there arose in Russia, the rise of unions trying to organize their workers so they could earn necessary for, and in the eyes of some people, power, they pick up on that. Well, you'll see. All right, but what they're basically presenting, the protocol, is, and see in the background, a lot of the things that I've just talked about prior. It's a multi-pronged attack on autocracy, and in particular, dynastic autocracy, a king. You'll see I don't know if you had a chance to read it, but basically they are advocates autocracy of a kingdom, a king, a czar, a king, who is properly trained, individual, who can make judgments, who knows how to keep everything in balance. And basically what this is going to say is the protocol says use every element of society that can in order to bring down what exists so that we Jews and our king can come in and take over, because we are the ones who are equipped. We Jews are the ones who are equipped to manage this. The rest of the world are inadequately prepared for leadership, and our king would be. And therefore we have got to, for the sake of the world and ourselves, right, both, we have got to take over. And that's basically, right? All right. Now let us read. I'm going to let you guys read, and if anybody has it, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty tough stuff. Barbara.
Yeah, I actually thought for a long time that most of the people that came from Russia and those countries were farmers. But it seems to me like a lot of them were like my grandfather. They were tailors. Do you know of any reason why so many tailors came from the Eastern Europe?
No, I don't know. I mean, remember that I know.
Okay, that's fine.
No, my grandfather was a very good one. Okay.
I can't answer. He died when I was too little, and we were 3,000 miles apart. I never met him.
Tybal, yes.
Some of it depending on the jurisdiction, because Jews couldn't join guilds or things. I mean, couldn't own land, couldn't do whatever. And that's such a portable skill that could also be done at home. So part of it is the circumstances drove more Jews into doing that. And you could have children help, you could have whatever. So that's why I think in part there were so many tailors, is because.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's one element, I'm sure.
That's an interesting thing, Tybal.
Yeah, that's true. Interestingly, by the way, in the Middle Ages, the most common in the Arab world, the Jews lived in the Arab world, the single most common area of labor was in clothing. The Jews, they made shmatas. Yeah. Not in Europe, in the Arab country, because it was a very complex process, all kinds of different levels going on simultaneously. Nobody forced them. They were doing other things too, but it's ironic that it ends up being in the All right. Okay, so let's begin reading, please. Somebody.
You're talking the protocols of the meetings?
Yes.
I'll read. Protocol number 1. Let us put aside phraseology and discuss the inner meaning of every thought. By comparisons and deductions, let us illuminate the situation. In this way, I will describe our system both from our own point of view and from that of the Goys.
Okay, but
Not
what
the
about
Goyim, but the Goys.
Goys? No, I mean they left that word in. Goyim would be in Yiddish. Goyim,
Right.
Goyim, right? They left that word in order to emphasize the attitude of the Jews looking at the rest of the world as Goys, and it's us versus them. Continue.
It must be remembered that people with base instincts are more numerous than those with noble ones. Therefore, the best results in governing are achieved through violence and intimidation and not through academic discussion. Every man seeks power. Every one would like to become a dictator if he possibly could. I don't want that. And rare indeed are those who would not sacrifice the common good in order to attain personal advantage.
All right, so humans are selfish, right? By nature, humans are selfish, but there are those who are equipped to make decisions, right? The noble ones and those who are not. And most people are not. Most people are ignorant. The Jews, of course, however, are among the noble ones. But we as Jews know how to use our nobility to manage everybody else.
That's why when I was young, my mom told me, you have to learn how to lie.
Okay, well, there you go. You see, you just proved that this is true about us, right?
And right. Even Shimona yesterday while I was taking her to the
doctor. Barbara Reed.
You gotta lie. What has restrained the wild beasts we call men? What has influenced them heretofore? In the early stages of social life, they submitted to brute and blind force. Afterwards, to the law, capital L, which is the same force but disguised.
In other words, disguise is also, the law is brute and blind force. Okay, so therefore, he concludes, go ahead.
I deduce from this that according to the laws of nature, right lies in might.
Okay, you've heard that before, right? So when you gain power, then you're right, okay? So what you see right away is we're very nasty folks from the get-go. We're aware of our intellect, our desire, and we are the ones who can do all of this stuff. That's ultimately what's going to be the sense. We are the ones, the Jews are the ones, and therefore it's our right, because we are innately powerful, and he'll explain in a moment why. We are innately powerful, and therefore it is our right to exert power. Okay. All right, thank you, Barbara. Next, political freedom. Somebody else.
I'll go.
Go.
Political freedom is not a fact, but an idea. One must know how to employ this idea when it becomes necessary to attract popular forces to one's party by mental allurement if it plans to crush the party in power. The task is made easier if the opponent himself has contradicted the idea of freedom, the so-called liberalism, and for the sake of the idea yields his power. I'm not sure I get that sense.
Well, I think what they're saying is that the opponent, for the sake of the idea, yields power. In other words, the principle overrides. The ends don't justify the means, right? The means, the value, the concept has got to be the overall thing, even if it means you give up power.
Okay.
So theoretically, for example, an individual who works in a democratic system, I give up power. I'm not the only one with the power. I share it with everybody else. I'm giving up my power so there can be democracy. All right. And he's saying that's something therefore people who are the power hungry people, in other words, who can manage power, should take advantage of that.
Okay.
Right.
To co-opt them.
So, basically, you're going to see he's going to talk about hypocrisy. It's a good thing. In other words, you can promise on the one hand to the people who are looking for autocracy, right, who want a king, but not the right king. But you can say, you guys are right. We need the power of one person. And at the same time, you can say to the other people, saying, you guys are right. We need democracy. And you feed both of them
what they want.
And if you feed both of them, what do you create? War. Right? And you just keep pushing and pushing. You, as the Jew, manipulate these polarities, weaken the system, making everybody feel as if they're threatened by the status quo. And you come in and say, I have the answer to all your problems. Let me manage it, and it'll be better. Me being who? The king.
So
best.
That's the mental allurement.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's taking advantage of that. In other words, Yeah, exactly. So by definition, the intellectuals would be over here, right? But they're leaving. They're willing to weaken their power by looking at the collective. So that would be Marx, right? On the other hand, over here you have those who would seek the power, right? Either this could be either church or king, right? Where it's autocracy. The Pope versus the king is over here, and their adherents being innocent fools who look for the power over there, even though it's incomplete power because it's governed by ideas that are really locking them in. So you have this loosey-goosey, warm fuzzy here, this hard thing here going on, both of which are collapsing by their own weight, shall we say. Boom, you step in, I'm going to make everything good.
Sounds familiar.
All right, we're going to put it in your hands, see what you can do. But we will already have created a system that allows that to do it. And he will here outline what that is. And by the way, the person talking here is the leader of the group of Jews who are reading these protocols or writing them, right? There was an old story that comes somewhere from Eastern Europe in the late 19th century that all of this began with a rabbi meeting in the graveyard in Prague, the Jewish cemetery in Prague. I was there, by the way. It's very interesting to see. There is a Jewish cemetery in Prague of renown. They meet there at midnight, all right, at a certain day in the year. I forgot what the day when it was. They meet at midnight, and that's when all this stuff is developed and implemented, okay? And it's secret, of course. Nobody, but a rabbi runs it. Okay, all right. Okay, let's go ahead.
It is precisely here that the triumph of our theory becomes apparent. The relinquished reins of power are, according to the laws of nature, immediately seized by a new hand, because the blind force of the people cannot remain without a leader even for one day, and the new power merely replaces the old, weakened by liberalism.
Okay, that's what we were saying. Go ahead, continue.
In our day, the power of gold has replaced liberal rulers.
Right.
There was a time when faith ruled. The idea of freedom cannot be realized because no one knows how to make reasonable use of it. Give the people self-government for a short time and it will become corrupted. From that very moment, strife begins and soon develops into social struggles, as a result of which states are set aflame and their authority is reduced to ashes.
Right. And so therefore, ultimately, well, I'm going to jump ahead, but we're going to continue reading. Who will take advantage of this?
Bad Jews.
We will, because we know how to do that. Continue.
Whether the state is exhausted by internal convulsions or whether civil wars deliver it into the hands of external enemies, in either case, it can be regarded as hopelessly lost. It is in our power.
Right. Now is the time when, it's in our power that we can step in and boom, can just finish those few more.
Yeah, the despotism of capital, which is entirely in our hands, holds out to it a straw which the state must grasp, although against its will, or otherwise fall into the abyss.
Because we control the money, right? The gold, okay? And you can now understand, right? That's a very ancient claim, right? Going back to the Middle Ages, or at least, that it flows out of that. We control the money. Therefore, we have one of the ultimate powers. So we have profound intellect. We understand how to do things. We know. And we control the money. And basically, he's making a case. You can see what he's building. And therefore, we are the ones who should be taking over. All right. Very good. Thank you. Somebody else read, please.
I could read.
Okay.
Is that to him,
Yes.
because liberal inclinations would contend that arguments of this kind are immoral. I would propose the question: if a state has two enemies, and if against the external enemy it is permitted and it is not considered immoral to use all methods of warfare, and as a protective measure not to acquaint the enemy with the plans of attack, such as night attacks or attacks with superior forces, then why should the same methods be regarded as immoral when applied to a worse foe, a transgressor against social order and prosperity?
Whoa, boy. Okay. Right? So you get the argument here, right? If we all can join together to fight an external enemy, how much more so should we come together to fight the enemy within, inside the society? Okay. All right, continue. Go ahead, Bernie.
How can a sound and logical mind hope successfully to guide the masses by means of reasonable persuasion or by arguments if there is a possibility of contradiction, even though unreasonable, but which may appear more attractive to the superficiality thinking masses?
Okay, so arguments by definition weaken decision. That's what he's saying. There should be no arguments, because even if the arguments are based on false premises, by the time you've demonstrated that, you're still dealing with arguments, right? So therefore, basically, and where is it that you find arguments emerge? Well, to look at it from a contemporary perspective, look at Congress, right? You have arguments, right? And do you make progress? One could make the case. Oh, no, it's horrible, right? Takes so much time, slow, doesn't fix the problems properly, too much compromising. Therefore, what do you need? All right, you need a single voice who can speak and come up with the answers. I mean, it's almost ironic, what we're sort of seeing right now. And I'm not trying to be political, just objective, right? I mean, that's sort of what's happening as we sit here. All right, okay.
Guided entirely by shallow passions, superstitions, customs, traditions, and sentimental theories, the people in and out of the mob become embroiled in party dissensions, which prevent all possibility of an agreement, even though it be on a basis of perfectly sound reasoning. Every decision of the mob depends upon the accidental or prearranged majority, which, owing to its ignorance of political secrets, pronounces absurd decisions, thus introducing the seeds of anarchy into the government.
Okay, so there you have it, right? But now look at the next line. Go ahead, Bernie.
Politics have nothing in common with morals. The ruler guided by morality is not a skilled politician, and consequently he is not firm on his throne. He who desires to rule must resort to cunning and hypocrisy. The great popular qualities, honesty and frankness, become vices in politics, as they dethrone more surely and more certainly than the most powerful enemy. These qualities must be the attributes of goy countries, but we by no means should be guided by them.
Whoa! I mean, we Jews always say we represent the highest level of morals and ethics, right? But what this guy is saying is not the opposite. We Jews really pursue hypocrisy and lying, right? Telling lies. And as I said before, hypocrisy. You're right and you're right. We love both of you. That's hypocrisy, right? You go one way, you go the other way. Whatever you're going to do, you'll do whatever is necessary. In other words, the ends justify the means, and might is right. Everything that you were taught growing up is not the way to. That's what it be. And who is it? The Jew. Okay. Or just that. Now, the next few lines, Bernie, please.
Let me see.
Our right.
Our right. Our right and might. The word right is an abstract idea, unsusceptible of proof. This word means nothing more than give me what I desire, so I may have evidence that I am stronger than you.
Okay, good. Okay, very good. So you can see how this is opening up. All right, continue. Somebody else, please. I hope you're enjoying this. Go ahead.
Rabbi, sorry, I can't turn my neck to read it.
Okay, somebody else, please. Margaret, can you read? Margaret.
I could read.
Okay, Paul.
What's it? This word means nothing more than give me what I desire.
No. Next line. Where does right begin? Where does it end?
Okay. Where does right begin? Where does it end? In a state with a poorly organized government and where the laws are insignificant and the ruler has lost his dignity as a result of the accumulation of liberal rights, I find a new right, namely the right of might, to destroy all existing order and institutions, to lay hands on the law to alter all institutions, and to become the ruler of those who have voluntarily, liberally renounced for our benefit the rights of their own power.
All right, so if this is what's going on, this is how who's the I? The Jew, must act. I become and I will use this weakness and this. And again, this is something that liberalism, again, he sees that this weakens because of all the dissension. All right, but we're going to see also even in a weak king, the same thing happens. It doesn't mean that there are autocracies, there are kingdoms that fall because the king is not smart enough, right? The ruling class cannot make. But of course, the opinion here is that by our very nature, Jews can do that. We can handle that because we have the quality to do that. It's almost as if the extremes on this end are responding to the extreme on the other side, of the enemy's side, our enemies. In other words, the anti-Semites are saying the exact opposite about the Jews, and the Jews are saying the exact opposite about the Goys. And I'm not sure, the mind of the people who wrote this, who aren't Jewish, right? It's almost as if they're creating a counterpoint. This is how people who are of that ilk, this is what the Jews would be saying, were they responding to our view of them? And we're going to try to make people believe that is true. That's what the people who wrote this are trying to. Okay, go ahead.
With the present instability of all authority, our power will be more unassailable than any other, because it will be invisible until it is so well rooted that no cunning can undermine it.
Yep, we're going to sneak it in. Nobody's going to notice it. Go ahead.
From temporary evil to which we are now obliged to have recourse will emerge the good of an unshakable government, which will reinstate the orderly functioning of the mechanism of popular existence now interrupted by liberalism. The end justifies the means. In laying our plans, we must turn our attention not so much to the good and moral as to the necessary and useful. Before us lies a plan in which a strategic line is shown, from which we must not deviate on pain of risking the collapse of many centuries of work.
Right. So basically, this process has been going on for a number of centuries. All right. And he could look back. One could keep in. Let's pretend we are Europeans. So you go back, let's say, to 1648. You have the Westphalia, the meeting there that recognized boundaries, tried to bring peace after the 100 Years' War. Right, to end all of that, and now we can go forward, right? So recognition among nations of other nations, all right? Sort of the democratizing of the rights of all the nations' rights. Then you have, again, the French Revolution, all right, French Revolution. But what have we seen, says the Jew? He's not saying it, but you can imagine the reader, the Jews got a point because, you had the treaty that took place in the 17th century. Look what has happened in Europe since then. Not been a beautiful, peaceful place. And of course, in 18th and 19th, you had the French Revolution, right? And even after that, the weakening of the church. All these things have happened since. So what good is all of that? The Jews understand it. That's what this, and we know how to take. Okay, and you? Go ahead, Paul.
In working out an expedient plan of action, it is necessary to take into consideration the meanness, vacillation, changeability of the mob, its inability to appreciate and respect the conditions of its own existence and of its own well-being. It is necessary to realize that the power of the masses is blind, unreasoning, and void of discrimination, prone to listen to right and left. The blind man cannot guide the blind without bringing them to the abyss. Consequently, members of the crowd, upstarts from the people, even were they men of genius but incompetent in politics, cannot step forward as leaders of the mob without ruining the entire nation.
A lot of people in Europe would agree with that at that time today. It's called for the wisdom of the autocrat. Who knows? Papa knows. So the last, Paul, the next sentence.
Only the person prepared from childhood to autocracy can understand the words which are formed by political letters.
Okay. So who is that person prepared from childhood? The prince who becomes king. Now, he's also, remember, he's reflecting on the weakening of Russia. And what this is saying, the author of is looking around and seeing that our Tsar clearly has lost his power. and is no longer in a position to rule. Okay, there's a flaw in the autocracy. Okay, and the only people who are prepared to step into the void and introduce a new autocracy that will work and continue operating ad infinitum are us, the Jews. All right, the Tsar's dynasty gave it a chance, good shot, but they blew it because they allowed too much liberalism to emerge. They were not strong enough. Because they were not strong enough, it fell apart. Okay, good. Somebody else, please. The people left to themselves.
Should I go again?
Should
I just go again?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, the people left to themselves, that is, to upstarts from among them, are ruined by party dissensions, created by greed for power and honors, and by the disorders resulting therefrom. Is it possible for the masses of the people to direct the affairs of the state without rivalry and without interjecting personal interests? Are they capable of protecting themselves against external enemies? This is impossible, since a plan divided into as many parts as there are minds in a mob loses its unity and consequently becomes incomprehensible and unworkable.
All right. And he goes on to talk about how the mob are a bunch of drunken people and the women are this and that, and how we, the Jews, have actually infiltrated the elements within society that play up to those things. So, for example, we run brothels. We oversee prostitutes who can go out there and corrupt the morals and weaken the societal foundation. But we also control the ladies who meet the wealthy ladies who sit around all day in their parlor meetings and have their tea at 4 o'clock or whatever. We deal with those women too. We've infiltrated everywhere, and we allow for these entities to percolate and continue to emerge, and basically they're going to clash one with the other, and that's going to be the end of it. All right. Now I want to go ahead and look at Herr Hitler as having today the final word. Let me just introduce one thing. I looked at this just to be sure. So Hitler and the Nazis' use of the protocols, okay? Now, this material came from the Holocaust Encyclopedia. Okay, it speaks for itself. All right, but it's a good solid source if you ever want to look at it. Adolf Hitler did not endorse or recommend the protocols of the Elders of Zion in the way the phrase recommends might suggest in a typical context. Instead, as detailed by the Holocaust Encyclopedia and other sources, Hitler and other Nazi leaders were aware that the protocols were a forgery. Despite this knowledge, they found it useful in promoting their anti-Semitic beliefs. They believed in the supposed inner truth of the document, seeing it as validating their pre-existing conviction in an international Jewish conspiracy. Hitler's and the Nazis utilized the protocols for propaganda purposes. Hitler referenced the protocols in his autobiography, Mein Kampf. The Nazis published numerous editions of the protocols. They incorporated claims for the protocols into their anti-Jewish propaganda. In essence, Hitler and the Nazi regime weaponized the fabricated content of the protocols to further their anti-Semitic agenda and justify their persecution of Jews. So in Mein Kampf, what Hitler says, he claimed the protocols revealed the nature and activity of Jewish people and exposed their ultimate final aim, predicting that the so-called Jewish menace would be defeated once the protocols became widely known. Hitler and other Nazi leaders believed it contained an inner truth that aligned with their anti-Semitic. So they were forgeries, to be sure, but the ideas, that's how they were written. But the ideas that they reflect are true. That's what Hitler. And just for the third, the protocols, of course, they were used, I don't know if you're aware of this, in the Russian Revolution, 1917 to 1920, in which 100,000 Jews were killed. The white Russian soldiers carried excerpts from the protocols in their backpacks. That's fact. They found people, when they went through the bodies of these people who were killed, and they went through their backpack, they found copies of elements. So they were used so that the soldiers, in their making war, would get that's one. Ultimately, the protocols were spread throughout the world. One of the great activists this way, of course, with Henry Ford. I have a copy of his The International Jew, the World's Greatest Problem, which is, it's not a verbatim presentation, but they are cited and quoted frequently throughout the whole story, which is national force for evil in states. Eventually, he retracted because he couldn't help himself. And by the way, it was published in the Dearborn Independent, which was his private newspaper, and it was published seriatim over a period of months, and eventually put together in a single book. But at the end of this is in the early 1920s. By the end of the decade, it had already been proven in court that the protocols are a forgery, it was fake, and he had no choice but to renounce the accuracy of what he had published. Nonetheless, he did have apparently a pronoun for the
and also Rabbi Father Coughlin, right? He was involved in propagating.
Say again?
Father Coughlin in Detroit.
Oh, yeah, yes, good old Father Coughlin. My father used to tell me about him. Right, the Catholic priest, anti-Semitic, hijacking. Okay, all right. So now let's look at Mein Kampf. All right, this is part of a selection. It's in the chapter 11 deals race, and it's interesting that a major shift that takes place in the protocols in Hitler is that Hitler and people around him, while they will refer to it as we've seen, as I just read, in order to advance an element of the problem. Hitler focuses in on something else, and you'll see it here already, which is the whole matter of race and blood, okay? And that's a theme that is not developed in the protocol. And the difference, of course, is that there's actual biological racial definition, which makes it even more challenging to deal with because it has nothing to do with culture, right? You can change culture, you can teach that. You can't take blood out. You can spread the contamination and bring down the course of normal relation. And there, the Jew, it's more than economic. And he doesn't deny that in focus, the racial. And therefore, just you should know, you may be aware. You know what the Wannsee Conference was? Anybody know what the Wannsee Conference? Yes, Bernie, what was the Wannsee?
It was in Potsdam, and it was discussed the final solution in the winter, and Nazi leadership came, middle ranked people. And Eichmann introduced about the railroads and how it would be done.
All right. Yeah, I mean, actually, Eichmann was the secretary. He took the minutes. It was Heydrich was the guy who supervised the meeting. And yes, it was basically the meeting of the board of directors to finally organize and reduce and cut. Basically, how do we make this process of get rid of the Jews as efficient as possible with a minimum of cost, right? It was boiled down to something like, and there was a movie made in Germany a few decades ago that Freddie and I have watched. It's translated. It's all in German. And the whole point, it's presented, it's the most boring movie you ever want to see, because that way it was a boring meeting. All right. And they just checked. You guys do this. You guys do that. You got this much money. Fine, you do that. The budget, that kind of thing. That went on for 45 minutes, and it was all organized. 1 second.
Sorry.
The second 45 minutes, because it was only an hour and a half meeting, followed by an amazing lunch, right, with all kinds, amazing. By the way, it was held in Wannsee, which is really a suburb further between. Actually, technically, it's part of Berlin, the state of Berlin. It's on the way between Berlin and Potsdam. I've been there a few times. I've been museum there. Anyhow, so they had this huge meal. And this was a resort, so it was high-class stuff. And they were there basically a few hours, and that was it. The second 45 minutes dealt with, you know what? The Mischlings, the mixed racial people. That was a dilemma for them. Because on the one hand, there's Jewish blood. On the other hand, there's German. So they spent time arguing. I mean, I don't remember exactly the outcome. But it took as much time to deal with that question. I'm mentioning this because it shows you how big this racial issue was in the mentality of this Nazi leadership. Okay? All right, Bernard, do you want to add something?
Yeah, they had the American film, too, with Kenneth Branagh, Conspiracy. And it was supposed to be secret, and they found the minutes later on somebody had made. And it's just almost verbatim. And Michael Birnbaum, it was the film group, and he said there were 80% of the Jews in Europe were alive before that meeting, and 6 months later there were 20% alive.
Yeah, right. It worked. I mean, that's when a lot of things were already in process. Designing the death camps had already begun, and the development of the poison had already. But they needed now to implement all that, and they had to make sure that that was going to go on in a proper fashion. So a lot of it's just a matter of coordinating everything to make sure the machinery worked. That's really what. And Michael Berenbaum is an expert. Anyway, so right here you're going to see it's just a summary, not really, but it brings together a lot of Hitler's things, and you will see it's. Well, it'll speak for itself. Okay, so please, somebody read. Jackie.
I can. Oh, sorry.
But who was talking?
Tybalt, because now it's not tilted, so I can read if you want me to.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Hence, the Jewish leadership in trade union affairs remains uncontested until an enormous work of enlightenment influences the broad masses and sets them right about their never-ending misery, or else the state disposes of the Jew and his work. For as long as the insight of the masses remains as slight as now and the state as indifferent as today, these masses will always be first to follow the man who in economic matters offers the most shameless promises. And in this, the Jew is a master. For in his.
By the way, do you see the echoes of the protocols in, right? Who offers economic matters in the most shameless promises, and in this the Jew is a master. You can see the echo. He's writing this in the early 1920s when the copying of the protocol began to emerge. And he, as I said, you saw there were references. What I mentioned, what I read to you before, were some quotes of some lines where he references the protocols. He already knows that it's a forgery. This is after 1921. Right, this is like in 1923. He's in prison, so he's aware of the fact that there is within it. This is okay. Continue.
For in his entire activity, he is restrained by no moral scruples.
Remember, we saw that no morality. Go on.
And so he inevitably drives every competitor in this sphere from the field in a short time. In keeping with all his inner rapacious brutality, he at once teaches the trade union movement the most brutal use of violence. If anyone by his intelligence resists the Jewish laws, his defiance and understanding are broken by terror. The success of such an activity is enormous. Actually, the Jews, by means of the trade union, which could be a blessing for the nation, shatters the foundations of the national economy.
And we saw that coming right out of the trade union, the whole thing. All right, continue. Go ahead, Tybalt.
Parallel with this, the political organization advances. It plays hand in glove with the trade union movement.
And the structure here, stop a second. This is the same structure as in the protocols. The unions, and then follows the political aspect. So you can really see he's digested the protocol. Go ahead.
For the latter prepares the masses for political organization. In fact, lashes them into it with violence and coercion. Furthermore, it is the permanent financial source from which the political organization feeds its enormous apparatus. It is the organ controlling the political activity of the individual and does the pandering and all big demonstrations of a political nature. In the end, it no longer comes out for political interests at all, but places its chief instrument of struggle, the cessation of work, in the form of a mass and general strike and the service of the political idea.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, somebody else now, please. Go ahead, Barbara. No, you're in mute. Unmute. Okay.
By the creation of a press whose content is adapted to the intellectual horizon of the least educated people, the political and trade union organization finally obtains the agitational institution by which the lowest strata of the nation are made ripe for the most reckless acts. Its function is not to lead people out of the swamp of a base mentality to a higher stage, but to cater to its lowest instincts.
Again, we did not read the section in the protocols that deals with the control of the press, but there's a whole chapter in the protocols dealing with. Continue.
Since the masses are as mentally lazy as they are sometimes presumptuous, this is a business as speculative as it is profitable. It is this press, after all, which wages a positively fanatical and slanderous struggle, tearing down everything which can be regarded as a support of national independence cultural elevation, and the economic independence of the nation. Above all, it hammers away at the characters of all those who will not bow down to the Jewish presumption to dominate, and whose ability and genius in themselves seems a danger to the Jew. For to be hated by the Jew, it is not necessary to combat him. No, it suffices if he suspects that someone might even conceive the idea of combating him sometime, or that on the strength of his superior genius, he is an augmenter of the power and greatness of the nationality hostile to the Jew. His unfailing instinct in such things scents the original soul in everyone, and his hostility is assured to anyone who is not spirit of his spirit.
Okay, so the Jew is responding to all of that in ways that are part of the nature of the good. Thank you. Someone else now, since the Jew.
Since the Jew is not the attacked, but the attacker, not only anyone who attacks passes as his enemy, but also anyone who resists him. But the means by which he seeks to break such reckless but upright souls is not honest warfare, but lies and slander. Here he stops at nothing, in his vileness to become so gigantic that no need be surprised if among our people the personification of the devil as the symbol of all assures the living shape of the Jew. The ignorance of the broad masses about the inner nature of the Jew, the lack of instinct and narrow-mindedness of our upper classes make the people an easy victim for this Jewish campaign of lies, while from innate cowardice the upper classes turn away from a man whom the Jew attacks with lies and slander. The broad masses, from stupidity or simplicity, believe everything. The state authorities either cloak themselves in silence, or what usually happens in order to put an end to the Jewish press campaign, they persecute the unjustly attacked, which in the eyes of such an official ass passes as the preservation of state authority and the safeguarding of law and order.
In other words, nobody addresses the threat of the Jew. Each element society that could put down the Jew buckles in the presence of what the Jews. Nobody has the guts to respond to the power. Now something else is going to be good. Thank you. Someone else. All right, Paul.
Slowly, fear of the Marxist weapon of Jewry descends like a nightmare on the mind and soul of decent people. They begin to tremble before the terrible enemy and thus have become his final victim. The Jew's domination in the state seems so assured that now not only can he call himself a Jew again, but he ruthlessly admits his ultimate national and political designs. A section of his race openly owns itself to be a foreign people, yet even here they lie, for while the Zionists try to make the rest of the world believe that the national consciousness of the Jew finds his satisfaction in the creation of a Palestinian state.
By the way, that's not Arab Palestinian, it's Jewish Palestinian.
Yeah.
I remind you that Jerusalem Post originally was called
Palestinian.
The Palestine, right. All right, go ahead. So we want to make a Palestine state. Go ahead. Again, the Jews, go ahead.
The Jew finds its satisfaction in the creation of a Palestinian state. The Jews again slyly dupe the dumb goyim.
See, goyim again, right? Protocols, okay?
It doesn't even enter their heads to build up a Jewish state in Palestine for the purpose of living there. All they want is a central organization for their international world swindle, endowed with its own sovereign rights and removed from the intervention of other states, a haven for convicted scoundrels and a university for budding crooks. It is a sign of the rising confidence and sense of security that at a time when one section is still playing the German, Frenchman, or Englishman, the other with open effrontery comes out as the Jewish race. How close they see approaching victory can be seen by the hideous aspect of their relations with members of other peoples takes on. With satanic joy in his face, the black-haired Jewish youth lurks in wait for the unsuspecting girl whom he defiles with his blood, thus stealing her from her people. With every means he tries to destroy the racial foundations of the people he has set out to subjugate. Just as he himself systematically ruins women and girls, he does not shrink back from pulling down the blood barriers for others, even on a large scale. It was and it is Jews who bring the Negroes into the Rhineland, always with the same secret thought and clear aim of ruining the hated white race by the necessarily resulting bastardization, throwing it down from its culture and political height, and himself rising to be its master. For a racially pure people which is conscious of his blood can never be enslaved by the Jew. In this world he will forever be master over bastards and bastards alone. And so he tries systematically to lower the racial level by a continuous poisoning.
So there's the racial.
Stop.
All right, somebody else. Cheryl.
Okay, here I come. And in politics, he begins to replace the idea of democracy by the dictatorship of the proletariat. In the organized mass of Marxism, he has found the weapon which lets him dispense with democracy and in its stead allows him to subjugate and govern the peoples with a dictatorial and brutal fist. He works systematically for revolutionization in a twofold sense, economic and political. Around peoples who offer too violent a resistance to attack from within, he weaves a net of enemies thanks to his international influence, incites them to war, and finally, if necessary, plants the flag of revolution on the very battlefields.
So who was responsible for World War I?
Oh, the Jews.
Yeah.
Really, so powerful. Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. I might have to leave in one. Oh no, I'm okay. I don't have to leave early. Okay. Around people. Okay. In economics, he undermines the states until the social enterprises which have become unprofitable are taken to the state from the state and subjected to his financial control.
Go ahead.
In the political field, he refuses the state the means for its self-preservation, destroys the foundations of all national self-maintenance and defense, destroys faith in the leadership, scoffs at its history and past, and drags everything that is truly great into the gutter. Culturally, he contaminates art, literature, theater, makes a mockery of natural feeling, overthrows all concepts of beauty and sublimity, of the noble and the good, and instead drags men down into the sphere of his own base nature. Religion is ridiculed, ethics and morality represented as outmoded until the last props of a nation in its struggle for existence in this world have fallen.
Okay, so he is looking at what has happened, and at that point in time, the evolving autocracy ends up, we know, not being a democracy, as you can see in all this. And the fact is that Jews were involved, not at the highest level, but there were some significant Jews who were communists and were part of the group that ultimately pushed forward the political changes. And people like Hitler and others will be pointing out those individuals on the assumption that they really represent large groups of people who are part of the process.
The evil Jews.
Right. Yeah. So we are part of the process that is spreading Marxism. Okay. So just finish it up.
Now begins the great last revolution. In gaining political power, the Jew casts off the few cloaks that he still wears. The democratic people's Jew becomes the blood Jew and tyrant over people. In a few years, he tries to exterminate the national intelligentsia, and by robbing the peoples of their natural intellectual leadership, makes them ripe for the slave's lot of permanent subjugation. The most frightful example of this kind is offered by Russia, where he killed or starved about 30 million people with positively fanatical savagery, in part amid inhuman tortures, in order to give a gang of Jewish journalists and stock exchange bandits domination over a great people. We only wish. The end is not only the end of the freedom of the peoples oppressed by the Jew, but also the end of this parasite upon the nation. After the death of his victim, the vampire sooner or later dies too. And you should see what happens if he goes into the sunshine.
Yeah, but
he's a vampire.
But clearly where it's ending up here is in his mind, there needs to be a vehicle to get rid of these. And of course, who's that going to? Him. And you can see where that's going to table.
If I may, after all of this, remind everybody, because of what Cheryl said, of that old great Jewish joke of the guy reading Der Stürmer, whatever, out in public, the Jewish guy, and the other Jew says, "Why on earth are you reading that?" And he said, "Because it makes me feel better about how much," I'm paraphrasing, "control we have." And what Cheryl said.
Right.
And while I'm saying whatever, if you didn't see it in the chat, Margaret wanted you to know that she wasn't able to read because she was the parent on duty and taking her child to a doctor's appointment. Bernie had a doctor's appointment. Oh, actually, I guess this is personal stuff. Berg, take this out. Anyway, people were sending explanations in the chat, Rabbi.
Thank you. Okay, you're very good.
Anyway, I actually have to go too. I love the class, but the content.
Yeah, I know it's disgusting. It is, but you've got to, in order, I see your hand, in order to what's going on, you've got to see all this. Next week, you'll get another stomach charter, which, by the way, also cites, we'll talk about where and all right, Barbara, yes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in about the middle of it where he cites the Frenchman, the Englishman, I think it was the German, as if they're individual cultures, but the Jew is not a member of those cultures. The Jew is an isolated person off by himself.
Yes.
We aren't Americans. We're Jews.
Right.
Well, we don't feel that way. And it's amazing that I just find it amazing. And I know that this was his feelings, but that this man could have felt that way.
But he remember, this is not just a matter of politics. He's talking about a group of people who, by their very physical and psychological nature, are what he's saying. So really, we are not, in the end, be thinking. We are not being. And you understand, and that's that kind of a message is what's perpetrated from the SS, okay, and from the other within the Nazi structure, down through troopers, right, down through the military, but more so the SS, who are trained with this racial approach. So when they line up a bunch of Jews over a mass grave and take out their machine gun and just mow them down, they're not killing human beings. They're killing these other. And by what he's saying there, of course, is that there's no unanimity among the nations in Europe. Each one, but he's trying to make a point. There is this natural superiority among indigenous Europeans, right? But unfortunately, their local nationalism prevents them from becoming a unified force against the Jew. Whereas the Jews are this unified force with a goal, with a whole strength, and they can more easily use it against Europe because they are divided. I mean, it's the same notion what the protocols talk about, where you have a single society with all these factions, right? And where you have factions and differences in that manner, then the Jews it just opens the door for the Jew to come in. But ultimately, this is all in his thinking. This racial issue puts the Jew at a level of humanity below that of the German, of the Aryan, right? And the Aryan is not just Germans. It's basically Northern Europe. That's the Aryan race and the superior, okay? We are below that. And below us are the Poles.
Really?
Yes. In his eyes, yes, the Polish people, sure, because they also were a backward people. I mean, what was the first country that they really conquered at war? It was Poland. It's right next door. And it was a pushover, wasn't it? I mean, you know how long that war lasted? It's over, however, a number of days.
39 till 45.
No, I'm talking about Poland.
I know, Poland was
conquest of Poland.
Poland was conquered within about a week or so.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't stand up. That shows you the nature of them as a people.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.